So we woke up on Monday in a new Merkel land with a very strong chancellor and a non-existent FDP, which was her traditional partner. So how easy will it be for her to form a new coalition, and who will be her next partner?
Well, the second question is relatively easy to answer, in the sense that there is probably almost certainly only a grand coalition that can come out of this. But it's not going to be easy. And the reason is that basically the SPD is torn between what you could consider two kinds of logic. One is it wants to be seen as a serious party. It understands that this is a moment of crisis in Europe. In fact, it has on the whole had, in my opinion, more sensible answers to the euro crisis than Merkel has had. And so that's sort of one kind of tactic that has to be considered. But the other is, of course, that if they move too much to the center, then there's going to be a whole gap that opens up on the left for a very long time. This is important to keep in mind. For a very long time, there was no viable alternative to the SPD on the left. The Greens were a bit of that, but they actually had a different demographic. The left party that has emerged over the last sort of 10 years, more or less, that's a very different kind of a party, because that's one that is, to some extent, draws votes from the SPD if the SPD moves too far to the center. And so the SPD has to think very carefully when it's negotiating with Merkel exactly sort of where the optimal position is, so to speak, where it can look serious but at the same time not maximize the losses it's going to get on its left side. And it's not entirely obvious where that point is, even from the position that we are in now, because quite a few of the policies that the SPD stood for during the election do not run all that much in parallel with what the CDU was doing. That said, I suspect we'll, in about a month, we'll probably get very close to a grand coalition. And don't forget that during the election, Merkel moved dramatically to the left, actually. She began to adopt quite a few of the platform points. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So lots of the social policies, she has moved to the left. So there probably is enough common ground, but it's not obvious. Remember, always the SPD, suddenly voters of the SPD have an exit option, which they didn't have in the past, and that is going to make life a lot more difficult.
And how do you think the election outcome will impact the future of Europe? Do you think we're going forward with the banking union? How optimistic are you? Because your speech was rather pessimistic, I would say.
I think one of the... so for as much as we know now, I think one of the things that has happened over the last almost exactly a year is that when Mario Draghi said the ECB will do whatever it takes to save the euro, at that moment the pressure that was on Germany to think seriously about what a banking union would mean, including a European level supervisory kind of arrangement, the pressure came off. It's in the same way that the bailout sort of lifted the pressure on some of the structural reforms that supposedly are necessary. I'm not a big fan of these structural reforms, but in the same way that it sort of lifted the pressure a bit of that, I think what Draghi did was exactly making it possible for Germany to step back a bit from this banking union, which I think Europe needs. I mean, there's a serious question when you have massive financial integration and all the banks are exposed to sovereign debt. At that moment, you need some kind of single resolution mechanism that if a bank gets into trouble, you can deal with it. And we don't have that at the moment. So that's not going to be. So in that sense, I don't think it's going to be simple. The other thing to keep in mind here is that there has been, Europe has actually been, ironically a bit, even though it didn't show up during the election campaign all that much in Germany, has actually been a point where the CDU and the SPD had more divergence than in a lot of other areas. The SPD was, in my opinion, far more sensible in terms of, okay, if we want to save the euro, it's going to cost us, and we need to be serious about that up front. Whereas Angela Merkel paid a lot, but didn't say that it was going to cost a lot. And I think that these two discourses are going to have to be merged much more in the future than they have been in the past in order for Europe to get anywhere.
But if a grand coalition is formed, do you think we're going to move away from that obsession of Merkel with austerity?
No, because I don't think she's the only one who wants that. I think the SPD wants less of that, especially in the debtor countries, essentially in the south of Europe. But I don't think she wants that, and I don't think the ECB wants less of that. I don't think the Commission wants less of that. I don't think the IMF wants less than that. And you read the OECD, they want. So it's sort of like it's basically there's one voice here that's speaking against that, and I don't think it'll be strong enough. No.
Okay, thank you.